My background is in linguistics and mainly in applied linguistics, so you will hear a lot about this today. But even if it's not your main field, I hope you will learn something new today. Um, we will, it doesn't change now? It, oh, it changed before. Okay. We will talk about narratives, lexicon learning, and we will see what can we get from this for language education and machine learning. We will talk about two studies looking at narratives and lexicon separately, but I thought it's a good idea to first see what was the context and the participants that participate in this research, so that it's easier to follow the studies. So some terms we will use a lot: L1 standing for first language. This is also known as native language. L2, think of the scenario here, how we define this as I came from Greece to Finland, where one of the majority languages is Finnish, and I learn now Finnish as a second language in Finland. And this is different from foreign language learning because this would be different from, for example, me still living in Greece and learning Finnish there, meaning in a non-Finnish speaking environment. Then we have MC, standing for mainstream class. This is the general education classroom within a mainstream school. And then we have RC, standing for reception class. This is a program that runs within the formal education system in Greece. And the main objective is to help students who have low skills in the Greek language to improve their skills through intensive courses. So they attend reception classes within the mainstream school, but they also attend the mainstream classes. Then let's delve more into the context. We work with refugee children who learn a second language, specifically Greek in Greece. And this L2 population can be quite different from other L2 populations due to reasons related to their background. For example, they might have more limited familiarity with schooling and environments and schooling norms, related, for example, to the nature of forced replacement. Placement. No, the forced, what's the term? Sorry, forced, the forced migration. And then on one hand, we had some challenges faced by the students themselves, but there are also studies showing that teachers face challenges. They feel less confident, they feel they have less expertise, or they don't have the appropriate tools to teach these students. So what are their objectives, at least for the studies that we'll talk about today? To look at the profile of the refugee children in Greece and to look at what are their language abilities or some levels that they may lag behind in order to inform teachers and help them and support their work. We work with more than 100 students in Greece. On one hand, we had the Aalto group. They were attending reception classes. This was the main research setting. And then they were attending second to sixth grade, and they were attending a school for less than 9 months on average. And then we had the L1 group. The students here were attending only mainstream classes, and they were similar in terms of grades and age. We will focus more into the Aalto group, and they complete a series of tasks. Among them, one was a background questionnaire. We want to see their language profile and literacy profile, and also the placement test. A placement test, let's say, places someone's proficiency level, proficiency skills into a level. The known ones are A1, A2, B1, and so on. So what we saw that the most common L1 was Kurdish, but there were also some Arabic speaking and Persian speaking children. And some of them reported that they hadn't attended school before they moved to Greece. We also had some questions in the background questionnaire that addressed language use, for example, in how often or if they would watch TV in each language, in Greek or in their L1, which language they would play in or talk with others in. And overall, we saw that they would use the L1 more compared to the L2. And we also had some questions addressing how often they would be engaged in literacy activities. Literacy activities refer to reading and writing, and specifically here, we asked questions like how often they would read books or stories in their family environment, involving both L1, L2, both in the past and the present. The highest score was 4, the possible score, and the higher the score, the higher the engagement in literacy activities. But overall, we see here that the engagement is quite limited. And regarding their language level, it was up to A1, so it was quite low. So, having this in mind, we can move to the first study where we looked at narratives. And narratives are stories which we can look at on two levels. First is macro and then micro. When we talk about macro, we talk about looking at a story in a more broad way. So we look at components, elements like the characters or the plot, what is expected to be there if it's there. And then micro level focuses more on, let's say, how something was said. We looked at the sentence level or even going deeper into the word level. There are actually quite many studies that have looked at narratives in bilinguals and monolinguals, and the results are quite mixed. But one study that looked at migrants and refugees specifically, they found that if we look at their performance overall, it is in accordance with monolingual norms. But if we look at different children separately, we look at that many of them perform below the normal range. There are also findings pointing towards factors that can affect narrative performance. It can be working memory, grammatical knowledge, proficiency skills. But in the study with the migrant refugee children specifically, what here looked like it played most of the role was for how long they have been exposed to the L2 and how rich their environment in general was in terms of the L2. So the questions we asked were the following. We want to see what are their narrative skills and how they compare to those of L1 peers and what factors can affect their performance. For here, it's useful to think of the background and the background characteristics we saw before, for example, L2Us that we talked about, their grade, and so on. So we had two groups, L2, L1, and we used a tool that is specifically designed for multilingual assessment, and we used the Greek version. It's actually available in quite many languages. And they are presented with pictures, they listen to a story, and they need to retell it orally. And then there are some questions. For example, how does the dog feel? And we analyze the retellings on 6 levels and 29 sublevels. So let's look at some of them. In terms of the comprehension questions, we saw that overall the L2 pupils provided less correct responses compared to the L1 pupils. And specifically, if we look at, there were 9 comprehension questions. If we look at each of them separately, we see quite low performance, and especially the ones that didn't address episode goal. These were the least challenging, we would say. But then for the L1 group, we see even 100% performance in some of them, lower in some others, but overall the lowest score will be around 60%. Some other levels on a macro structure. Yes, here we have, okay, story structure. Story structure looks at what are the elements that are expected to be there and if they're there, like the episodes, the time reference, and so on. So how complete a story is. And we saw that the L2 pupils produce less complete stories, so they would omit story elements. And if we would look at the elements of each episode separately, there were three episodes in each story, and each episode has a specific goal. What is the objective? What is the thing that is trying to be achieved? And then the attempt, how is tried to be achieved, what does the character do, and then the outcome, what happened. And we saw that in most of the cases, the goal would be omitted. And that was the case for both L2 children and L1 children. But if goal was produced, then most probably it would be produced by L1 children. In terms of the microstructure, here we go more into the sentence and word level, as we said. Some of the levels we analyzed was the narration length, so how many sentences were in the stories, how long the stories were, and the L2 stories seemed to be shorter. And also, it looked like the L2 stories involved less subordinate clauses. Subordinate clauses means dependent clauses, which is the opposite, let's say, to main clauses. If we think of a sentence like, I was late at work because I woke up late, then I was late at work is the main clause, the independent one. It can stand on its own. And because I was late is the subordinate one. It explains why, and it can stand on its own. But specifically, the type of clause that looked more challenging for L2 pupils is the relative clauses. And we will talk a bit more about this in a while. Then we also found some factors that affected the performance, and specifically the proficiency skills in the L2 and how much they would use the L2 seemed to play a positive role in their performance on a macro and or micro level. So what did we see? We see that L2 children performed lower overall compared to L1 children. And this may come in disagreement with some findings, but we need to take into account here that proficiency skills played a role, and their proficiency skills were quite low, remember, up to A1. Then we saw that the questions that were the least challenging were the ones targeting episode goal. But on the other hand, when the children had to retell the story, goal was omitted. This may seem a bit contradictory, but actually the reasons might be a bit similar. So if we have a question that doesn't target goal, like how does someone feel, that requires the participant to understand someone else's position, to understand their intentions, their perspectives, and this may be challenging. And also, when we are to produce a story, it might be easier to say what someone is doing in the story than saying what was the goal, why someone was doing something, because again, we need to understand intentions and someone else's position. On a micro level, we saw shorter stories from the L2 children and also less relative clauses. And relative clauses can be, let's say, a special type of clauses, because let's say in a clause, relative clause, it means in a sentence like, the book, which is blue, is on the table. So which is blue is a relative clause. But for example, in Greek, let's say, since we talk about Greek here, this which, the equivalent which in the Greek language, is also marked in terms of number and gender. For example, in the sentence, the book is singular and also neuter in Greek. So this which in the Greek language needs to show that it's singular and neuter. So there also other properties in this clause that can make them more, can render them more challenging. And also, we found some factors to play a role, but we didn't find an effect of grade in our study. There are previous studies that show an effect of age, but the study that looked at migrants and refugees specifically all didn't find an effect of age either, similar to our results. So based on these two studies, we could conclude that when we are exploring abilities in refugee children, probably it's more important to look at language-related factors. For example, their proficiency skills or their language use. And what insights can we get for teaching? Teachers could encourage children to read more books, to tell stories also in the classroom environment or in general, to enrich more the environment in terms of the L2. They could help with the students to work on stories and help them understand more elements that require them to actually get into someone else's position, a character's position. And also to focus more on some, for example, relative clauses that seem to be more demanding. So with this, we conclude the first study, and I think it would be more easy maybe if we look at whether there are questions here. Any discussion?
Yes, I have now allowed you participants to unmute yourself. Please ask questions if you have or comments.
Thank you, Konstantina. I have a question.
Yes, please.
Which language was about education system? I mean, L2. What was
Yeah,
it? Was Greek?
It's Greek, yes. So they were currently living at least at that point in Greece, and they were learning Greek in the school environment.
Okay, and but L1 is different for
Yes.
it was okay. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions before I ask mine?
Yeah, sorry. So Konstantina, this is Devdash, and a very nice talk. I have one question. So you mentioned that, like in your results, you mentioned that the people who has like L2 has a lower capability of explaining a particular story, like what is going on, right? If I get it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you also consider the factor, for example, when you show the pie chart, they come from a particular background.
Mm-hmm.
And do you also consider this factor of the language similarity in a context? For example, Farsi with Greek or Kurdish with Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also kind of factor how they grasp a particular context, maybe. This is also a factor. And also learning language from a biological perspective, it also depends on the cognitive ability. So I think this is also kind of factor that should be taken into consideration. And also the third point is that the teacher who is actually teaching, delivering, they should he or she should know the background where they're coming from and how they relate the story into their background. So, I mean, just as comments, like how these things should be taken care of. Maybe it will
Yeah.
give you a different insight.
No, thank you. These are very nice comments. Thank you. For the first one, if I understand correctly, only like, do you mean that they might have different stories in their cultures, or they might have different
Yeah,
ways of saying?
for example, like Aesop fables. We all know the story of like maybe the rabbit and the tortoise, for example. And this
Mm-hmm.
is a common story all over, like in Europe, in India, in everywhere. But they learn it in their own language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So maybe the story which are very common to demographically, if you show them, maybe they will come to conclusion in the same way, irrespective of the language, because the story they grasp, the moral is the same.
Yeah.
So it depends on what kind of story they are exposed to in their culture and in their language, like how they are telling. If, for
Mhm.
example, if some story which is very specific to the Greek culture, but it is not something specific to the Kurdish culture or Farsi or
Mhm.
other Middle Eastern part, they might not relate this to their own life.
Yeah.
This is
Yes,
also kind of a confounding, yeah, this is also kind of a confounding factor which comes also into the play.
no, that's a very good point. And these were there were two stories and they were quite simple in a sense. So there was like a dog and a boy, as we saw in the pictures. And the one advantage, let's say, of this strength of this tool that we use is that it is available in many, many languages, not only Greek or English, but also Kurdish, if I'm not wrong, and many, many others. And so it has been tested already in many languages and it has
Okay,
been
okay,
standardized. So,
okay.
so that's one of the reasons we use this tool specifically.
Mm,
But
mhm.
at the same time, one limitation in this research could be that which has been done in other studies though, that they
Mm.
test the narrative skills not only in the L2 but in the L1. So
Okay,
it would be ideal if we would see also how they produce the story in the L1. But
exactly.
as far as I remember, when we ran this study, at that point at least, I haven't checked if this has changed now. The story was not available in all three languages that we were
Mm.
testing, the L ones. Uh,
Okay,
I think in two of them or one of them. So that's why we couldn't do this.
okay, 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 yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. Then we have Masa waiting for a while.
Yes. So thank you for the nice presentation so far. And then I have one question it's like more finding out what the situation is right now, like finding out the statistics, explaining the situation and not using like much machine learning or modeling techniques right now to do any predictions, right?
This in this study we didn't use
Yes.
anything. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
I mean, there I see a big potential. As pointed out, one should leverage their personal background as much as possible. But I know teachers, and they are typically under resourced, so to say. So ideally, the teacher would tailor the teaching to each student's individual background, the stories or characters that it came across. Like I used to watch a lot, like certain type of comics and something like this. And here, this is the interesting question: isn't there a big potential for AI to tailor the teaching for each student? So to use the story, if you have this rabbit and turtle tale, for example, use this tale to teach. Oh my God, do I remember like in German the four cases using this tale and. But now you can do it on an individual level. So you can teach this grammar, German grammar. It's my L1, my native tongue, using the specific background of a student. So there I see a big potential. And what else I wanted to ask? Yeah, I like this systematic approach of analyzing narrative skills, and I'm actually thinking about how can I use this in my machine learning classes. So the story would not about dogs and tree would not use trees and dogs, but logistic regression and feature learning. But the idea is very much the same. You just change the concepts. So you have different kind of subjects and objects in the story. So I was wondering, how do you know, Konstantina, how efficiently or how easy you can use the results of this analysis to, for example, adapt the next lecture. Next week, we then do an extra session on vocabulary based on this result. So do you see that this analysis is used in a feedback loop during teaching already?
I mean, if I have empirical evidence or what I think.
Yeah, if you have empirical evidence. So this analysis that you did is really high end, so to say. And I was wondering, you showed this fine-grained results that some students are having challenges with this conditional clauses, or how did you call it? This relative clauses.
Relative clause, yes.
So that each week the teacher looks at these results and knows, aha, next week I have to do this in the class.
I don't know of cases that, like, I haven't talked with teachers that they have actually seen this and done like a plan the next session lesson based on this.
Mm,
So I don't have um, from experience evidence or from some
mm,
studies,
mm,
um, but I believe that it could be used. If I was teaching, for example, I would take this into account and
mm,
plan the
mm,
next lesson or
mm,
lessons based on what seemed to be
mm,
challenging. So, what seems to be a gap, how can I support this gap?
mhm, mhm. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks a
I hope I
lot.
answered your question. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, should we continue?
Yes. Um, yes. So we're continuing with the second study where here we looked at L2 lexicon. And one way to look at someone's lexicon is through a word association task. In this task, imagine that, for example, I'm the participant. I'm presented with a word. Let's say the word is book, and I'm expected to provide the word or the words, depending on the task, that come to my mind. So it can be, I don't know, what would come to my mind? Page, text, and so on. So we have a stimulus and we have a stimulus, the book, and a response, let's say page. And one way to look at this is to look at what is the relation, what is the association between the stimulus and the response. In the literature, more in the past, I would say, the classification would focus on paradigmatic associations, syntagmatic associations, and clang associations. Paradigmatic, more in the past, would focus mainly into whether the stimulus and the response are of the same word class. So here, let's say the example bag and sack, they're both nouns. So they would here we would have a paradigmatic association. And if the stimulus was bag and then a participant would say carry, here would have a syntagmatic association. We have a noun and a verb, different word class. Or if we have bag and bug, then they're similar on a phonological level, and here we have a clang association. But this criterion of mainly focusing on whether we have the same word class or not was considered in later studies quite restrictive. And this was not the only criterion, at least, that someone would take into account. And also the terminology changed. In more recent studies, we see meaning-based associations, position-based, and form-based. And also what also was suggested was to look more into subcategories. So it's not only what is happening in terms of meaning-based association, but also what happens under that. We can have different types. We can have synonyms, we can have lexical sets, and other types of associations within this category. Lexical set means, for example, we have furniture, the word, and this is a hypernym, an umbrella term. And under that, we can have couch, table, chair, so many other words. So for these reasons, we focus on this type of categorization. Previous evidence, however, show that in general, paradigmatic and syntagmatic associations are quite common and important in the lexicon of both bilinguals and monolinguals. And actually, the paradigmatic associations is the most common type for both of them. But if we compare, it looks like they're more common for the monolinguals. While on the other hand, even if both monolinguals and bilinguals provide quite few responses, clank responses, remember bag and bug, still they are more common comparatively from bilinguals. Again, there is evidence showing what factors can affect performance in this task. It can be whether stimulus is a noun or a verb, or it can be how familiar someone is with the stimulus, and many other factors. But this evidence comes mainly from studies with older learners, meaning adolescents or adults. So we want to look more into younger ages, and we work with primary school students. So we want to see what are the word association patterns we see in L2 children, and how do they differ from potentially from those of L1 children, whether word class plays a role, whether that we have nouns or verbs, and what other factors can affect. Again, we had two groups, and the task here was administered orally. So, for example, I would say a word, and then the child would need to say any word that comes to their mind. And specifically, we instructed them that there's no limitation. They could say as many words as many came to their mind, and that L2 children specifically could respond not only in Greek in the L2, but also in their L1, meaning Arabic, Persian, Kurdish, and even in English if they knew something in English. And in order to see whether the word class played a role, we had an equal number of nouns and verbs. And we had a quite exhaustive paradigm with 8 levels and 30 sub-levels of analysis. Here we can see the levels and some of the sub-levels. We had meaning-based. Remember synonyms, we can have lexical set, we can have definitions. Position-based, here we have cases where the stimulus and the response can form a phrase. For example, it can be the stimulus was, I don't know, clean, and the participant would say floor. So it would clean the floor, it's a phrase, forms a phrase. Dualing refers to cases where we have a combination of meaning and position, mainly that was the case. Then we have form-based. One example could be, think of the case of bag and bug. And erratic means wrong associations, so cases where we don't see an obvious relation. For example, if the stimulus was bread, and then someone would say green, we don't see any obvious association between these two. So it would be categorized as wrong, as erratic. Then we also analyzed cases where we actually saw translation. This is not a type of association, but still we scored them. And for example, let's say I would say bread in Greek, and they would say bread in English. And then we also had non-verbal responses. So cases where they would not say something, but they would show something. Let's say I would say the word jump, and they would get up and jump instead of saying something. So based on the results, we see that the most common broad category was meaning-based, and that for the L2, and that was actually the case for the L1 group as well. Then position-based was a quite frequent type for both groups, but for the L2 group, we see that actually wrong associations was quite common, quite frequent, which was not the case for the L1 group. And also, non-verbal responses were non-existent in the L1 group, but there were some provided by the L2 group. If we look at one of the categories more in detail, so the subcategories, there were some mixed results, and specifically derivation seemed to be less frequent in the L2 groups, while inflection, now I'm comparing the first two subcategories, inflection seemed to be more common in the L2 groups. And I will explain more later what is the difference and why, how this can be explained. Then, as I mentioned, we want to see whether the word class of a stimulus would play a role. So what we found was that a meaning-based association would more likely come after a stimulus that was a noun compared to when the stimulus was a verb, while position-based associations and dual link associations would more likely come after a stimulus that was a verb and not a noun. So we see here an opposite direction. Factors that played a role, school attendance and the proficiency level seem to play a role in terms of how many words they would provide that would show better lexical knowledge of the stimulus, or how many more meaning-based associations they would provide. While we also saw that children that seem to use the L2 more also seem to provide less nonverbal responses. So overall, we see that meaning-based associations were actually the most frequent category for both groups. And this agrees with previous findings, but here it's quite important to point this out because we see that this is also the case when we look at low L2 proficient learners. Remember, their proficiency level was A0, A1. And then derivation was quite challenging. And also compound. Compound, I didn't mention it before, but it was also another sub-level that we looked at. But now comes the point that I said I would explain more. So in derivation, also in compounding, we create new words, which may differ in terms of word class or meaning. For example, when I have the verb understand and I add the suffix able, I create a new word, understandable. This is derivation. Or in case that, let's say, I have snow and man, I create the compound word snowman. So here I create a word with a new meaning, or that even changes the word class. In the first case, understands a verb and understandable becomes an adjective. So, but then inflection is a different process. We have one core word, let's say understand, which can appear in different forms. Understanding, understands, understood. So, but then we have one core meaning. So these processes are quite different, and that's why derivation and compounding can be considered more challenging. Then we saw a relation between nouns and meaning-based and verbs and position-based. And how this could be explained is that usually nouns are organized in lexical, in semantic fields. For example, I mentioned before furniture and chair and couch. They're all associated. Whereas when we have a verb, usually we need something to complement it. Let's say for the verb clean, someone would ask, you clean what? The floor, the chair, something needs to come afterwards to make the verb complete in a sense. And then we saw again some factors that can play a role: school attendance, proficiency skills, and L2 use. And again, what can we get out of these results in terms of teaching? Again, it could be important to encourage children to enrich the environment in terms of the L2. The nouns could be taught for example, in relation to other words that are associated on a meaning level. And then some, again, demanding aspects like derivation could be more in the focus. these studies focus more on second language acquisition, but the other studies also where we looked at what techniques in the classroom can be efficient for teaching, or we looked at we conducted surveys with teachers, what challenges they face. So we tried to address the main theme from different approaches. And yeah, this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your attention. And again, I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Konstantina, for this great talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, any questions, comments? So one question that I didn't forward before was, what exactly is a lexicon?
The lexicon is, let's say, the vocabulary that we have, the mental lexicon, the words that we are exposed to, the words that we actually acquire, we learn, that we are familiar with. But it can be lexicon actually, there are three aspects in terms of lexicon. It can be the size, so how many words are included in the lexicon, the depth, how well we actually know each of these words, and the organization, how words are linked with each other. And this can change a long time. For example, the size can change. We learn words, we forget words, or we learn a word, we know it well, and then we know it somewhat well. Or then we start with knowing it somewhat well, and then we know it very well. So these are also dynamic aspects that can change.
And we change, sometimes we change the meaning.
Yes, also different words have different meanings, and that's the reason why it's good to look at word to have these more exhaustive categorization paradigms, because we
Yeah.
look at the different more subtle differences and less broad
Yeah.
differences.
I remember sometimes I got a lot of student feedback, and sometimes I was a bit unsure how they mean it. And one was dog lectures, and this is like a slang. Sometimes, at least I hope I understood it correctly, for cool lectures or
Oh, I
sick
didn't know this.
lectures. Sick. This is sick man.
Okay,
Can have a
this is new.
bad or a good or positive or negative sentiment. It's funny how this is actually quite fluid. So language is more a dynamic, fluid thing than something rigid. And
Yeah, and this can also be not only for L2 learners, but also for L1 learners. Like we keep learning words even in our native language. It doesn't mean we know all the words, and still our lexicon can change the
yeah.
size or the depth of the lexicon.
Very good. There's one comment like, for example, scientific terminology for an academician is one form of lexicon. Yeah, but I guess you, Konstantin, use it in a specific way, the term lexicon. It's not like a
Do we
written
mean, for example,
down a
dictionaries?
dictionary or
Yeah,
glossary.
dictionary is different. Yeah.
It's the
We talk
difference
about the
between
mental lexicon here.
mental lexicon. But it's somewhat similar to a dictionary or to a, how do you call it, vocabulary. You have a list of items. Each item has a form, like the letters when you see a word, and then you assign it a meaning.
In this sense, yes. It's just that the lexicon, one dictionary might have all the words in the language, but it doesn't mean these are my mental lexicon
Yeah.
includes all the words, or one dictionary might focus on some specific field. So again, it will be more limited compared to someone's mental lexicon. So it kind of it also depends what exactly we look at.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will stop sharing, but I can start so I can see yeah everyone,
Yes.
maybe. But
Go ahead.
yeah, if I need to share again, of course I can do so.
Okay. If Maza, do you have a question?
It was a little part of it still. I had a question about lexicon. Is it like the dictionary that you have in your mind, but which is like the size is limited, the number of words you have is like specific to you, and then the meaning is like the meaning of a dictionary, or is like what you understand from for that word, or
Um, you don't usually don't ask what is the meaning, what the word means. Um, this is not the focus of a word association task, at least what we looked at, but there can be other tasks where, for example, you ask them to explain a word or to rate how familiar they are. But different tasks can also, it's also possible that they can indicate at least if they know this word well or not very well. For example, there are specific association types, for example, meaning-based, that based on some theoretical frameworks has been shown to be an indicator of increased lexical knowledge. So if someone gives a meaning-based association, it's an indicator that they know the word quite well. But in these tasks, there's no question like what does a word mean? But so you expect if there's indication that they know it well, you expect that probably they know the correct meaning. Or if there are different meanings, that's a different thing. Then you would need to see in different contexts what is the meaning of a word, or if they understand the specific meaning in this context. I hope I hope this is clear or answered your question.
yeah, like so then so it's only the lexicon means like what you have in your mind, but then the meaning is like you can analyze that, or like the association is something else that you can analyze. So it's like words that you have in your mind is like lexicon. Is it true?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I have now a bit more delicate question for Konstantina. In your experience, are there some best practices that you have seen how to leverage native language in early school kids? There are these tendencies to, of course, as in many aspects of life, to be abused for politics. And in my home country, in Austria, at least, there was the discussion of should we ban a native language that is different from our main language, which is German, from school. So force you or forbid students, for example, I mean, this was, I think, more like a joke or a publicity stunt, to forbid students to use their native language in the breaks at the school. So force students to use the local majority language without exception on the schoolyard.
Yeah, no, that's not what I believe. And also, there are studies and evidence showing that it's beneficial to include the L1. Students can create links between the two languages. It's not that we necessarily only think in one language. And the L1, what someone already knows in the first language can really be an advantage when they learn a second language. And also, when I mentioned that, for example, children could enrich their environment in terms of the L2, I don't mean that this should be at the expense of their L1, but both are important. And we don't overlook the L1. And even in the classroom, there are techniques like translanguaging that tries to use both of them. For example, if one grammatical even phenomenon, let's say a plural, is in the two languages, in the L1, someone's L1 and the L2, then they can, in the classroom, they can work on how plural is formed, let's say in the L2, by also thinking of the L1. And these can really be beneficial for learning and also L1, L2 links. So I believe it's beneficial to actually not overlook the L1. Yeah, and not look at the L2 as an island in isolation, far from everything. No.
A
Good.
similar question.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yes, of course.
In your study, you have seen monolingual, bilingual, but there is other option, I think, multilingual. And for example, there are some students, they have two mother tongue, like Kurdish Persian, or Kurdish Arabic, or Arabic Persian, or something like that. Have you considered or seen some cases?
Yes, it's a good point. Actually, as I showed at the beginning, there were students who had two L1s, quite few, but there were, meaning either Persian and Arabic or another combination among Kurdish, Persian, Arabic. So this is indeed the case, but there was a vast majority of Kurdish, and then we didn't really look at what effect could be their language background, whether they had two L1s or whether they had Arabic or Persian as their L1. This is, of course, something that I agree would be good to take this into account, but it wasn't the focus, let's say, of our study, but also there were some limitations. The vast majority was Kurdish, so there were quite few that were speaking another language. Yeah, I hope this.
Yeah, thank you. But I think it might be affected because
Yeah.
in most cases, mother tongue, for example, is Kurdish, education system is Persian, and when the students talked about the story, it was in Greek. Okay, when mother tongue is Kurdish, they are thinking in Kurdish language. When the last education system was in Persian, they try to define it in Persian, for example, like if we see like a progress, and when they want to talk about it, they start to speak in Greek. Yeah, and based on because it's the progress happen about bilingual or multilingual students, because I have some experience about it, because of that I asked to might be affected.
Yeah, of course, as I said, it can play a role, but also we should think here that in some cases some kids didn't even have school experience before coming to Greece. Of course, this doesn't mean that they don't think they're L1 or it doesn't play a role, but in terms of the school environment that you mentioned. And yeah, as I said, at least we took into account in the narratives by selecting a tool that has been standardized in many languages, or in the lexicon trying to involve L1, or also in teaching interventions we run, we try to involve the L1. So when it was possible, we really took this into account. But yeah, I hope that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mentioned the last education system because I found the average age in your studies was about 10 years. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again. We are coming to an end of our hour. Thanks again, Konstantina, for this exciting talk. And I'm looking forward to see how you might now leverage these new possibilities of LLMs in many different ways. As I now saw in the media, there are now also tools that allow to develop apps without coding. How is it called? Lovable, this Swedish company, if I remember correctly.
I haven't heard of
But
it.
it would be cool if you now try just upload the PDF of your PhD thesis and ask this tool, draft me an app or a variation of existing apps. As I understand, they are like this Duolingo, and you get an app that implements the findings from your studies for use in classrooms or at least in
Okay.
pilots.
Okay.
And yeah, so we are currently discussing, me and Konstantina, how to move forward from this using LLM technology, and
Exactly. Yeah.
hopefully at some point, maybe 1 year or so, we hear then your experiences in this project.
Hopefully.
Okay, thanks a lot again, and everybody have a nice weekend and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Bye.